Have you ever wanted to visit a place where the oil runs deep, the nature is beautiful, the old and young respect each other, and disappointing your parents is easier than driving 5 minutes down the road to the grocery store without some lunatic crashing into you? Welcome to Anida, which is a beautiful country located right here on the Robian Sea, also bordering Decca to the southeast, Miscus to the south, Savaharaha to the west, and Zolcish to the northwest. The most notable thing about the area is that the Robian Sea is absolutely overflowing with more offshore oil reserves than the rest of the world combined, as well as several underground oil reserves as well. So all four countries around this sea are absolutely swimming in oil money. It is insane. On to some basic facts. The population is about 35.5 million. The country is mostly human populated, with over 98% of the population being human. The official language here is Anidian, although Atkayan is still spoken from the colonial days, and Valurian is a language that is predominantly spoken by refugees from Miscus. The capital is the city of Trogdöad, located right here in the center on the coast. But the largest city is just to the north, known as Haravara, right here. The religion they follow is Gishalpa, which is a polytheistic religion from the Dimric subcontinent that focuses on a hierarchy of gods and a very strong honor system. And their government is predominantly composed of a presidential republic. The economy is incredible, actually, mostly due to aforementioned oil money, although the country has made an effort to diversify their economy more in recent years. Their currency is actually the second strongest in the world, behind only Mauti, with one Anidian hala being equal to almost $3. And the GDP per capita is a whopping $63,000. And since I know most of you are watching this from Earth, this number is pretty similar to countries like Sweden and Australia in the real world. The crime rate is very low, with a crime index of 20.5. Life expectancy is relatively high, with an index of 1.304, and the country is also quite stable. On to the physical geography. The country's location near the equator gives it a mostly tropical climate, with a lot of monsoon and savanna type climates, although some of the higher elevation areas in the south and west are a bit colder. And here's the elevation map. The country is pretty hilly in the north, but transitions into being straight up mountainous in the south, with the noticeable Jasdal River Valley running through the middle of the country, flowing north from Miscus into the Robian Sea. Anyway, here's their flag. The meanings are pretty simple. Basically, the white represents peace, the blue represents perseverance, which blue meaning perseverance actually originally came from the Gishalpa legend of the Eternal Ocean. They have the orange is the golden emblem of the Gishalpa faith, although recently this emblem has more so started to represent communism in the area, because the new communist state of Miscus that emerged after the Civil War used the emblem in their flag. However, Anida specifically uses it for religious reasons. And the 7 stripes are meant to represent the historic 7 major cities of Anida, which, interestingly, don't include the capital, but more on that later. In the history section, the modern state of Anida was formed after Haravara and several other city-states broke away from the Miscus Empire back in the 4700s. They ultimately united in order to prevent being taken over by the newly rising Atkaya dynasty, and they fought against the Atkaya dynasty for a while, but were occupied for a few years in the late 5200s and early 5300s, until eventually that dynasty started getting weaker, left the region, and Anida was left alone. At this point, it became a loose federation of the 7 small states. However, as the collectively agreed monarchy became more and more powerful, they kept taking more and more control over the country until eventually it just became a straight-up authoritarian regime. And at one point, citizens were even banned from living outside the 7 major cities. So the rural areas were entirely emptied out. Which is why, besides the 7 cities in the modern capital, modern Anida does not have any other major cities, just small towns. After oil was discovered in the Robian Sea, Zolcish used the new oil money to stage a coup in their southern neighbor and end the insanity, and they established a new republic that tried to make the country rich via oil drilling. And then this state here, known as Gosevara, which used to be two separate sections, offered the southern section as a centralized location for the new national capital. Because they didn't want to favor one city over the others, and they wanted to move away from the dictatorship a little bit, they ultimately created Trogdeuad as the new capital city. However, then the climate crisis started hitting, and the non-environmentally friendly oil drilling practices started becoming a major threat that the world was super concerned about, until eventually the youth just straight up overthrew the government again, because Anida's government took the side of the oil companies that were destroying the environment. And then, unlike Zolcish, Anida managed to stay wealthy after this whole situation, finding new, more sustainable ways to harvest the oil, and starting to diversify their economy, which leads to the modern day. Now, in terms of relationships, Anida's closest ally is almost definitely Sevaharaha, due to the similar culture and politics. Decca also really likes them because they both have the oil and they're both trying to work together to find more sustainable oil drilling methods. Miskis, they have a love-hate relationship with. Anida doesn't really like how totalitarian Miskis' new government is, but Anida is housing a lot of Miski refugees, and they have more of a strategic business partnership as well, so they're not entirely enemies because of that. However, Anida and Zolcish absolutely hate each other. Anyways, I think that's going to be all for this video. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time for Erebor! Peace.